I wish you all a warm welcome because it's very cold here on the southern hemisphere, different from a lot of you guys. So I have been working for 5 years already on a really big application. 4 years, I think. As we have mentioned, it's in a it's in a oil and gas industry, and we have a big customer with lots and lots of business rules that we need to take care of. And I want to bring you something from our experience about how it is to handle a big application and how to scale freestyle UI5 apps. And using TypeScript and PubSub. PubSub is a library that we have built to support that. So my talk will be divided in two. I have 20 minutes or so to give it. So the first 10 minutes will be focused on scaling the application, and the other half will be focused on TypeScript and PubSub. So I will show you code, but my presentation is also a little bit about theory as well. So I wish that you all like it. And also, I want demo because of the time. So as we have said, here we go. First of all, imagine that we are working on an oil trading software. So this oil trading software is going to be a really big project. It's going to have lots and lots of features built into it. So we are going to have lots and lots of people building it. We're going to have lots of features to build it. It's going to be an oil and gas application. We're going to have lots and lots of people using it. It's going to have billions and billions of dollars passing through it. And then we get everything together, and then we mix. We have a team of 10 SAP UI5 developers ready to tackle the issues, ready to start working. Then we get everyone together. We start pumping up backlog items. We start pumping up user stories. We start making stuff work. And then we start working, and then soon a strange thing happened. Something that I'm sure that lots of you guys have already seen. So we open our application, and then we go to the controllers of our application, and then you start reading around. And all of a sudden, you have almost 4,000 lines of application. You have 5,000 lines of controller code. You have sometimes 10,000 lines of lines of code, lines of JavaScript code. And then everything can get a little bit spaghetti, and you don't know where you are. And then, thank you all. That was my presentation. So this is how every project in UI5 is done on the wild. So goodbye. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, not really. So this is just the start of my presentation. So I want to invite you all to analyze with me, why does this happen, how to fix it, some rules of thumb to avoid all of this happening, the code, and the final regards. I know all of you are eager to see that TypeScript code, but the code is going to be right down because we need first to get the fundamentals right, the theory right, and then we move on to TypeScript, and then we move on to PubSub. Because as you know, you can write bad code in any language. It's not just a language A or B situation. So going back to our controller, our big controller, way too many code bases look like that in the wild. Way too many code bases. So controllers can get out of hand. You don't have a single line of testing. By the way, great talks in this conference about testing. We need to test more, guys. We start missing deadlines, we start failing our sprints, and I have seen projects getting canceled because of bad code and stuff like that. But why exactly does all of that happen? Like, why does this all ends up happening? How can we even get those 10,000 lines controller codes? So in my experience, in my history in SAP and using SAP UI5, it boils down to state management. So I would like to invite you all to come visit this little village that I call the MVC village. So we have three guys that live here. We have the model, which is the state of our application. We have the view, where the view is responsible for displaying the state of the application, but has a state of its own as well. We have the controller as well, which is responsible for changing the state of application, but has a state of its own and can change the state of the view as well. And those three guys, they talk with each other. So first, the model can talk to the view and the view can talk to the model. So usually you have a two-way binding situation, and then those two states can change each other. Usually you have the view can change the controller, but the controller can use ByID to get the view and change the state of the view, and also has a state of its own. And the controller can talk to the model and change the state of the model, and can read and write to the model. So as you can see here, if you analyze it via a street and a city development way of looking at it, you can see that you don't have a way to travel between all of them with a easy way. So you have all of these routes going in and out of your villagers. So I would like to invite you all to see a way of how can we fix it. So people are already saying to us, it's probably architectural problem. Yes, we are talking about architecture. We are talking about SAP UI5 application architectures and how using a TypeScript to support that. So first of all, we need to get rid of the states. So the lesser state that we have in our application, the better, because you want to aim to have a single source of truth in your application. You want to have only one way of knowing how something can happen and where is the data, because as you all know, we need to work on data. And you need to modularize everything, because to have a great architecture, you need to modularize everything. So I would like to invite you all again to our village, but this time we'll be redeveloping our village. But we don't need any shovels. We will be redeveloping our village. It's just a way to see this more clearly. So first things first, the view must be able to send events to the controller, and we will avoid all the internal states of the view. So we will avoid the controller getting controls from the view, and the controller is forbidden to access the internal state of the view. It's not forbidden on the code, so you won't have a runtime error or a compile error if you try to do that, but you as a team and in your architecture, you're gonna avoid doing that. And the controller will read and write to the model, and that is the only way to interact with the state of your application. So to change the state of your application, to change something on the screen, to change something that happens inside in all of these that you're building, because remember, it's a big software. You're gonna have billions and billions of dollars passing through it. You can't screw that up. So you have the controller tackling the state of your application, and then when the model changes, it will trigger a rendering of the view. So as you can see here, it was a two-way binding, and now we will prefer a one-way binding. And this way, you only have one way of going through your village. So your data and your developers also won't get lost when they try to build something inside your village. So this time, the view can talk to the controller will talk to the model will talk to the view. Kind of a little bit fast, but I'm not wrapping here. So, okay, I know you all are eager to see that code and know how you want to see how does all the theory applies to practice. So for the models, we will prefer one-way binding in this architecture. We will make everything must be in the model. And then in the controller, we will avoid ByID. So ByID is forbidden. And then we will avoid touching the view's state, because the view has a state of its own. Because, whoop, there it goes. Okay, I'm better now. So you have the visible, you have the busy, you have the text. All of that is a state of the view, but we want to avoid touching that in our application. And then we will have no reference to the view or the controls ever in the controller. So you won't get a reference to your view or reference to your control, anything. And then the controller now comes a little bit of the part around avoiding those 10,000 lines of code. So it will only be used to removing data from UI5. So you will use it to receive the events, to get the data that you need from your events, and sending those to the classes that will actually execute the logic of your application and that will change the model of your application. So the controller will not have code on its own. It will actually be sending data to your classes that will do the logic for you. And for the view, all properties that change must be binded to a model. So of course you have data that you won't change, so it's okay. You don't need to bind it to a model, but you will avoid set visible, set busy. You will always try to have a model doing that for you. So, okay, now, where is all the TypeScript and PubSub that I have promised? So I would like to invite you all to see the architecture that we are currently based on right now. This is a thumb diagram. So this is what we use inside SAP. I'm sure you have seen something like that, either on SAP documentation or something like that. So UI5 communicates with the view, and the view reads from the model. The extension points, they exist by part of UI5. And then we have UI5 sending data to the controller, and in our application, we have the adapter to communicate with UI5, then we have the PubSub and the rules. So going into that, for the controller and adapter, sorry, I didn't pass my slide. So for the controller and the adapter, their job is to remove data from UI5 and get the strings, the integer, all of those kinds of stuff, all the native stuff, all the stuff that you can interact upon on your classes, because you want to avoid having UI5 references on your classes, because you want to use UI5 to show your application, to communicate with the backend, but not to execute the logic of your application. That's on you. That's a developer thing. You don't want UI5 doing that, because that's your job. And for the PubSub and the rules, the PubSub is one of the main things that support us, because it will take the events from the controller and send to the rules. Rules are what we call classes that change business logic. And we have tons and tons and tons of classes. We have more than 500 rules in our application right now, and it's going bigger every day. Like every pull request adds 2 or 3 rules. So going into TypeScript. So as you can remember, Peter Music has already sent you a little bit of the flavor of what we use in our application using TypeScript to UI5. So just to get something out of the way, it's a superset of JavaScript. It's made by Microsoft, which is a good thing. Imagine the power of type language allied with the versatility of JavaScript. So that's the big win for TypeScript for me. You have the versatility of JavaScript. You can do whatever you want with it, but you also can have type inference and type compiling, because this way it will make everything work together and it will make everything scale better. Now, what is that PubSub that I'm talking about? So you have publish and subscribe. PubSub is a short for publish and subscribe. So it is a wrapper around SAP UI5 event bus. So we are not creating something new. We are just wrapping SAP's event bus, and we are optimizing the event bus for TypeScript. So I know you all are looking for this, and here we go. We have a little bit of code. So this is TypeScript right here. This is a controller. This is one of our controllers. So here we have this method called onDealTransactionTypeChanged, where we have the adapter, and then we have lots of stuff going around here. So let's look into what the getDealTransactionType method does. So this is Visual Studio Code. And here you can see that this method, although it is a JavaScript method, we also have type annotations for it. And we have this transaction type. Instead of it returning a string, a key part of our application, of our architecture, is about returning the classes or the enumerators that will represent our data. So for example, here our transaction type is it's an ABAP table. So it has a char1 key. And you can only assume B, P, B, and some values. So if I try to use that for example, to compare with a random string, TypeScript comes in and saves us from that mess. It saves us from doing something that we would only figure out in runtime if we were using JavaScript, or wouldn't even know how we would do that. So right now, and then right after, we have this part here. So we have the service locator and the dot locate, which are singleton objects that we have inside our application to get a reference to the PubSub that we have inside of it. And then we have the from event and publish. So this will send the event from this controller to all the classes that are listening to it. And so let's see. We have here the new transaction type changed event. So I searched that in my VS Code, and as you can see, I have more than 34 files listening to that. So what does that mean? That means that if I didn't have this, if I were following a known architecture or just a plain way of developing UI5 applications, I would have 34 different ifs inside my controller doing that kind of logic. So in this way, what I can do is that I can have 34 different classes and all of them listening to the same event and then deciding what to do with it. And so this way I have lots of modules and everything is completely separate. And TypeScript really gives us a hand here because it will make all of these things connect with each other and make sure that everything is working correctly. So this is the great power of TypeScript. And that is why we are trying to make it available for all of you that are using UI5 on the wild. Right now, we can only use it inside SAP, but we are going to have it open source for you. That's one thing that we are working on, and it's something that I need you all to have this. So going into PubSub. So what we have here, we have a first citizen class. This is TypeScript class. It's an ES6 class as well. But it's a TypeScript class that will implement an interface, and then we can work on base from here. So we have, for the PubSub part, we have this listener and we have the observe. And the listener will take the class as a generic, and then we'll mark this class as a receiver of events from our PubSub. And really, on a low level, we'll mark it as a receiver for the SAP's UI5, SAP UI5's event bus. And then the observe will mark the method as a listener for the new transaction type change. And this will have compile time verification to see if you are receiving the right arguments and if you are receiving the right data in your application. And if you do something wrong, the compiler will tell you. This is the power of TypeScript. And if we analyze a little bit later, a little bit down here, we have the code that will actually clear our data, because this is a class that we call a resetter, is a pattern that we have developed in our project, inside our project. We have a sync await. We have a really clear way to read the code. So this is exactly what we need. This is a clean way to read the code, to avoid spaghetti code, to avoid getting projects canceled. This is so good. This is so great. But sadly, I only have 2 minutes, so it's time to go. So to find more information, I have developed a boilerplate to start a new product following this style. So unfortunately, I am really sorry if you are not inside SAP. I cannot send you this link right now because I have way too much things that it's a work in progress. So I have a way to import Node modules directly inside UI5. I have a way to test UI5 classes without importing, without opening Chrome, without using Karma. We have a TypeScript compiler, which is modified to work with UI5. So, but we are going to make that open source, and we are going to have great stuff coming out of it. So bear with me for 1.5 minutes more. So for the main takeaways, you limit the MVC flow inside your application to have a greater control, because you want your developers to have control of your application, not the controller. You don't want a 10,000 lines controller here. And you will prefer one-way binding. Avoid calling method in the view controls by ID set visible, set busy. All views properties must be binded to a model, and you will use TypeScript if you can. I'm sure you will be able to in the next few months. And split your controller into several classes. As you can see, this was really fast. So thank you for real this time. So this is my Twitter, my GitHub. You can talk with me. I would really like to talk with y'all. I would really like that we were like really close to each other talking, and I can take some of your questions right now.
Thanks, Gabriel. Wow, a real enthusiast, I have to say. And we actually have several questions, and let's look at the highest rated one. Are there any blogs or plan to show a simple example of this implementation?
So in the link that I have sent, in the link that is on the slide, I have a example in GitHub. Unfortunately, it's only on SAP's internal GitHub, but we have a plan. I have a plan to open source this to have an example. I have created what I call a boilerplate where someone can copy this project and then build on top of it. And I think it's going to be great to have something like that.
Thanks. I was searching for the button. How do you filter a list table without using by ID?
Oh, great question. So what we have done is that we have created extensions for UI5 controls that we create a JSON model that will hold the filter objects and will hold the sort objects, the sorter objects, and then we will bind that to a control of ours, and then this control will internally call the binding.filter or binding.sort methods. And this will change the binding, the filter and the sorting inside a by ID. Whoever asks this question know what they're talking about.
Okay. And another question is, how can you open, for example, a dialog without accessing the view from the controller?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing from the one before. So we have what we call a extended dialog that we can open and close via a Boolean inside a JSON model that we have only for controlling this. And I know this sounds like way too much work. Like, why would you do that if you can just access the view? But when you have a really big application, you need to have that kind of discipline to have it extend and work and be really scalable from the ground up.
Okay. And how does this compare to ELM or reactive programming in general?
So yeah, these guys, this person also know what I'm talking about. So the first idea that I had was to actually import Redux inside SAP UI5, but it turns out that we didn't need to do that. So we created all of this to avoid having something that would not work all that well for us, which was we found. So it is actually inspired by reactive programming. We tried to use RxJS with this architecture, but we found out that the developers were not able to learn all those new patterns in a quick way. So all that we did was create this where the developers can bring in their expertise with UI5 and object-oriented code, and then they can build up. And if they follow all the requisites that are pre-written that I've said on the MC Village and etc., then they can create all of these following the reactive programming without even knowing that they are doing it, which is actually one of the reasons I think our application scales all that well.
Okay, so thank you very much. And actually in Hamburg, it's also cold. So not everywhere it's warm. Thanks for your talk.